Hey guys, you're listening to episode 185 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Keelan, and I'm here with my co-host and brother Cody. How do you know when God is asking you to take faithful risk with your work and your resources? That's what we're talking about today with our guest Joe Daly, founder of Daly Goods, a handcrafted leather company in Waco, Texas. Joe's journey has moved from church operations into entrepreneurship. But through every season, one question has kept surfacing. How can work, money, and calling all be surrendered to God? In this conversation, Joe shares about discernment, marriage, business, and the conviction to practice what he calls upside-down generosity. It's a story about taking risks, trusting God, and building something that aims not just to grow, but to give. If you've ever wondered how faith should shape the way you work and give, this episode is for you. Before we get there, this podcast has grown almost exclusively by word of mouth. For those of you who have helped get the word out there by sending a link to a friend or sharing on social media, we just want to say thanks. It really makes an impact. If you think this or any of our other conversations are thought-provoking or inspiring, take a moment and share it with someone. We have been blown away at how God has used some of these stories to make a radical impact in the world of generosity and missions, and you can be a link in that chain. All right, let's get to the interview. All right, we're here today with Joe Daly. Joe, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So why don't you just take us back to the beginning? What was life like growing up, and how did you first come to know Jesus personally?
Man, the beginning was cold. I grew up in Minnesota. I live in Texas now. I've been in Texas 15 years, but man, the first 22 years of my life were in Minnesota. And for the listeners who know the difference, man, I'll take a Texas summer over a Minnesota winter. Neither are enjoyable, but if I had to pick between the two, I'm going Texas summer. But man, grew up in Minnesota and grew up in a really loving home. We went to church. I'd call it a Christian home. And man, I'm fortunate to really not have conscious memories of not knowing Jesus as my savior. To be clear, I believe I absolutely had a season in my life where that was not true. I mean, I was born a sinner. I don't have like a specific day or memory necessarily, but I think around 6, 7, 8 years old, in a genuine childlike faith type of way, the Lord truly got my heart. Just by grace through faith, I was saved. And so I like to joke I was a Pharisee in training growing up very unintentionally. I thought what it meant to be a good Christian kid was just to follow all the rules. And while obedience is part of that, I objectively was good at obeying the rules, but all the while on the inside was lonely, insecure. Pornography entered my life at around 13, 14. And I was just kind of living this duplicitous life where it was like on the outside, I had it all together. I had the nickname Mr. Perfect in, elementary school and junior high, and I both loved it and hated it because I didn't want to lower my standards, but I also, again, I was lonely and insecure, and I knew on the inside and things that I was hiding that were wrong, that I was convicted over, just weren't God's best for my life. And so, I think I did have a genuine faith transaction with Jesus growing up, but then, kind of from 6 to 22 or so, it was just this little Pharisee in training that tried to look all good on the outside. It says Matthew 25, you like whitewashed tombs, the outside is pretty, the inside's full of bones and death and decay. And that really described my life. Although, again, I think I was saved. And so just kind of this weird tension. But grew up in a home where I was loved and provided for, very secure home, which, man, the older I get and the longer I follow Jesus, the more and more grateful I am for that. I know that's not everyone's story of the home and the family they're born into.
So as you grew up and you were starting to find your way in life, what were some of the things that you had your hopes set on? What are some of the things that you were aiming for in life?
I like to joke it was a bunch of G's growing up. So golf, grades, girls, and God was one of them. But man, looking back, he took the back seat more often than I'd like to admit. And so I was an avid golfer growing up. I loved all sports, but golf was really my main favorite and best one. And so I played golf through college. I played 4 years in college. I thought about trying to go pro and play for a living. I was like barely good enough to try. I never ended up trying, and I don't have any regrets about that. But man, it was a huge idol, looking backwards. And similar with what girls thought of me and similar with grades. all three of those things aren't bad in and of themselves, but I cared way too much about them and they became idols in hindsight. And so even that, just learning what it looks like to have this good thing and work hard or try hard in sports or try hard in school to the glory of God, but not let it take the ultimate place of God in my life. And so that was definitely a wrestle I had growing up, and really something that I can still wrestle with today for that matter. I experienced some cool success in golf in college in a way that I'm grateful for, but also was really fortunate to just see, man, this is meaningless. Like, this is not where life is found. I remember winning some cool tournaments and just being like, all right, like, what's for dinner or what's for breakfast tomorrow, right? It doesn't satisfy. And so, yeah, kind of a weird, not a midlife crisis by any stretch, but almost like a quarter life. I was only 22 at the time, just like, oh man, like, I still want to work hard and achieve, but man, if this is what it feels like afterwards, that really puts some things in perspective. Is like, man, what does it look like to live for Jesus and, work hard for Jesus, win for Jesus, if you will. And so, yeah, that was a unique formative experience growing up for sure.
So you talked about these four categories, God being one of those. I think many people can relate to that kind of like segmented life. And then wanting, something different to bring everything into focus. What did things look like going forward from there? Where did you start to go about that, and how did that begin to take shape?
So it was in college. I look back. So again, I think I genuinely love Jesus, was doing my best to live for him. And probably the sin that was the most still prevalent in my life that I hated, but I couldn't quite kill was pornography. So in college, I would have seasons of victory where I'd go weeks, even months at a time, and then I'd slip back into it. And it was just like, man, Romans 7, it's like, man, why do I do the things I don't want to do? And so I was convicted over it. I wanted to stop and I couldn't on my own. And man, I remember sending an email. It was January, my senior year of college. It was to probably 12 to 15 men. Half or so were peers and friends, half were older men. It was just like, hey, I need help. I don't want to do this anymore. I love Jesus. The Bible is clear. This is not good. Like, help me. And then one of them was a guy I had worked for at a summer camp 2 years prior. So after my sophomore year, I worked at a summer camp for a few weeks. I did a different internship my junior year, but then my senior year, sent that email. And it was a couple of weeks later, I think he and I chatted. And I was like, I really think I might want to go work at camp this summer. So graduate from college with a 4-year degree and then go work at a summer camp. And he's like, man, I'll take you on one condition. And I was like, man, anything. I'm thinking I'll do janitorial work, like maintenance, like you name it. If I could come work for you, it'd be an honor. And he was like, man, I want you on my leadership team. And dude, I was just mind blown. I was like, what? Like me? And here I am confessing this sin to you. And so, man, in a really humbling way, he saw some gifts that I think were from the Lord in my life, but also just he took me under his wing and loved me and showed me what grace was like, what forgiveness was like, how to study the Bible, how to find freedom from pornography. And so I worked at Kanakuk camps for a couple summers. I graduated college, worked there. I did a year-long Bible Institute there, and then worked there again the following summer. And now in hindsight, I also met my wife at that camp. Our oldest son is named after that boss. And man, I know in ways I try not to, I take for granted getting the privilege to study God's word for a year, fresh out of college. But I look back and that season was deeply, deeply formative in my life. I can't imagine my life not having that 15, 16-month period where I was just immersed in biblical community, immersed in God's word, and then really having an older, godly, wiser man model the way for me and just show me what it's like to find freedom from sin and find a superior love and satisfaction in Jesus. And so, yeah, it started with just this cry for like, man, I need help. Yeah, into this deeply, deeply formative season of walking more intimately with Jesus. And man, I clearly don't have it all figured out since then. But by God's grace, I have experienced sustained freedom for well over a decade now, longer, from pornography. I'm capable of it tomorrow, and I've been free from it for a long, long, long time now, and other things like that. And so, yeah, I really look back at that, kind of post-college, early 20s, young adult season in the Kanakuk world as just a deeply, deeply formative time that I'm immensely grateful for.
Joe, I know that generosity has had a huge impact on you, both as a receiver and also as a giver. Can you tell us some of the early seeds that were planted in your life around generosity?
Totally. Man, it's funny. The Kanakuk has one of them, but there's two in particular that stand out. One is just receiving some awesome gifts growing up. Again, I was an avid golfer, and I remember one year, I think I was 12, it was around there, where my parents surprised me with a golf club that I really, really wanted. It was a specific 3-wood. For any golf nerds listening, it was a tailor-made burner bubble, which is, I'll be 40 later this year, so to date myself, it was a while ago. But man, I wanted that thing so bad. It was a extended family Christmas, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and we opened all the gifts. And they saved that one for very, very, very last. And so, we think we're done. And then my dad comes around the corner and gives that to me. And I just like burst out crying. I was so happy, so excited, just like ugly crying as a 12-year-old in front of everyone and did not care. And so, man, just the power of receiving a really thoughtful, intentional gift was modeled to me from my parents. Just they knew me, they knew what I loved and what I wanted. And they're good parents. They're not perfect, but they're good, loving parents. And so I think I experienced it that way, in a way that impacted me probably more than I'm aware of even. And then in that Kanakuk season, I met a guy and we went to lunch. And this guy's like a business owner worth, I don't know, I have no idea how much, but more than broke, 22-year-old college Joe. And he's like, man, let's go lunch. I'll get lunch. I'm like, oh, no, I'll buy mine. Which was just dumb. Right? But, I'm trying to like look good in front of him. And he's like, Joe, if you wanted to do something for me and I said no, how would that make you feel? And I was like, not good. He's like, please let me buy your lunch. And just really talking about, man, in order for someone to be able to give, someone else has to be open to receiving. And man, that just stuck with me. That, I was probably 21, 22 at the time, and it's really never left me. And so just the power of generosity and the joy of generosity, it can only happen if someone else is willing to receive. And man, that's ultimately true and modeled for us in the gospel of all places, right? For God so loved the world, he gave. And it's like he can give Jesus to us all day long, but unless we receive that gift, unless we freely receive that gift of salvation by grace through faith, it doesn't matter. And so just seeing it in the gospel, seeing it modeled in my own life. And then, it's been something that I've tried to lean into and learn more about with each passing year.
Yeah, you're right on many of those points, especially about receiving. And it's something we actually don't talk about nearly as much as we should, but it's come up a number of times. And actually, I think Cody mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking, but he mentioned the idea that you can't really experience love unless you're able to receive. You can't just give, give, give. Like it involves, two-way direction. And I think especially, for some people that listen to this show a lot, that sometimes it can be easier to give and not to know how to receive well. And that's a great lesson to learn as a, 20 something year old about kind of the graciousness of receiving well. But that's like a learned skill. It does not always come naturally. And I think that's an important part of being a giver, is knowing how to receive, but something that's definitely underappreciated. Now, I know you also have a love for creating useful, beautiful, lasting things. And I'd love to hear where some of that passion first got planted in your heart as well, because obviously that's a big part of your life now.
Yeah. Things I did not have on my life bingo card was running a custom leather goods company. And man, it's been awesome. We're having a blast. But I've always appreciated like quality. I understand like minimalism as it's like traditionally defined. It's not owning nothing. It's owning a couple or a few, one like nicer things that you enjoy really and you take good care of. And so that probably does define me. I'm the guy that wears black t-shirts and black polos and just has a pretty simple closet, simple life. It's like I find what I like and I stick with it. And so I've always kind of had an eye for like simple and quality in that sense. That marks me. And again, going back to like receiving some really thoughtful gifts from my parents. And then I can even think of, growing up as I got older into college, young adult years, like the joy of giving a really thoughtful gift to someone. Like I am not knocking giving gift cards as a gift, but I'm like, oh man, gift cards are lame. It's like find the gift that would really minister and mean something to someone and get them that. And it doesn't always have to be expensive, right? It could cost $5. It could be free for that matter. But when you know someone, you know what they like, what they don't like, what their interests are, and you really take the time to get to know a person, and then you can give them a gift that meets them right where they're at. Like, I just think that's so much fun. Like, I'm a gift nerd, if you will, just the studying gifting and practicing gifting. And so you kind of combine this like simple quality side to me, the love of a good gift. And then, yeah, running now specifically with leather, it's both comical and like, okay, I can kind of start to see some of the ways the Lord's used different parts of my story to get me to where I am today. But yeah, I didn't grow up working with leather. I really wouldn't say I'm handy. I'm handy-ish. I enjoy working with my hands. I read a great quote years ago, back when I was working for the local church. It just said, if you work with your mind, Sabbath with your hands. If you work with your hands, Sabbath with your mind. And, back then I'm working for the church, very much a knowledge job. And so when I started Daily Goods as a hobby, it was very much like the embodiment of that quote. And I was like, oh man, yeah, this is really like fun, life-giving, cathartic even to work with my hands. Where now Daily Goods, it's much more mind job for me now. But there is something about just crafting and creating something with your own two hands, like literally seeing and experiencing the fruit of your labor. It's a lot of fun, very life-giving, and something I think you don't have to do as a Christian, but there is something too that God made us embodied physical humans. And so getting to do that with our own two hands here at Daily Goods is a lot of fun and very life-giving.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've heard that same quote about if you work with your mind, rest with your hands. And I work with my mind. I'm mostly indoors or on the phone in meetings or, doing analysis. So a lot of times after work, I'll go over to my friend's house. He's got a farm down the road, and I'll say, put me to work. And I just don't want to make decisions. Just tell me what to do. I want to move. I've found that
That's awesome.
definitely to be true in my life. But you mentioned that you spent time working in a church. Tell us a little bit about that season that came before full-time work with Daily Goods.
Yeah. I used the phrase not on my life bingo card. I don't know which one was less on my bingo card, working for the local church or running the leather company. But man, I was living in Dallas. So again, I grew up in Minnesota, moved to Dallas. I was working for a medical device company, great people, great products, quality. I mean, it was everything I thought I wanted in a job and more. And again, I was open about my faith at the time. It was just like, all right, I think the way I'm going to live a life on mission is as a business guy, and I'll try to give generously and serve, but do business. And so was doing that for a few years and had just a great career in front of me. Should I continue to kind of diligently apply myself? And man, I just didn't have like a peace in my spirit about it. And all the while I'm serving 3, 4, 5 times a week at the church and thinking nothing of it. It's just like, well, yeah, I love Jesus. I'm a member at my local church. Like, this is what you do. So I get to this point of feeling called. I would get called or even convicted to leave the medical company. And, a couple of weeks later, get a call from my church and like, hey, we've got this job open that we think you'd be good at. Would you ever be interested in working here? And I'm like, me? Like, you got the wrong guy, kind of. It's like, what? And they're like, well, let's get coffee. And so sure enough, 3 weeks later, I accepted a job there. And as my wife would be the first to tell you, I'm often late to the party. I find my way to the party, but I can be late sometimes, just like I was in dating her for that matter. But I said yes and just dove headfirst all in and just loved it. Did it for about a decade, a little over a decade, between 2 amazing local churches, one in Dallas and one here in Waco where I live now. And so learned a ton, had a blast, did it long enough where I thought, all right, this is what my life is going to look like, and was very content in that. And I think secure in that even. And it's like, all right, Lord, this is where my life is serving you best. Awesome. And so, yeah, I didn't see it coming and then loved it. And then, yeah, I loved it so much that when the Daily Goods thing happened, was like, oh man, didn't see that coming either. And I'm now loving that too. So I've definitely learned never say never and never say always when you follow Jesus in terms of your plans for your life, because you never know what he's going to do.
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple times that Daily Goods was kind of the grassroots forming during this season of life where you're working with the church. And I'd love to hear what kind of the intersection was there. What was God doing in you through each of those at the time, and how was he kind of putting the groundwork in place for where he was going to take you?
Again, hindsight's like, oh man, I can see what the Lord was doing now. I think, at least more. At the time, it didn't really make sense. But a buddy of mine had a journal, for all practical purposes, is the same as how we make ours. And we would joke. We worked at the church together in Dallas and would kind of joke. I was like, I'll bet I could make that. And he's like, oh, you should, and we'd say it to each other in the hall in passing. And it happened for like 3, 4 months. And man, one day I woke up, every quarter or so, I try to do what I call a brain dump and just take an hour and get everything that's in my head out on a sheet of paper, try to close some open loops and organize and whatnot. And I wrote that down, like make a journal. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm kidding in the sense of I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm serious of like, I think I could figure it out. And so in that moment, was like, I got to decide, do I want to do this or not? Because if not, I got to stop saying that. I got to close this mental loop. And so I get on Google and I'm like, leather store Dallas. Like when I say I don't know anything about leather, I mean, I know nothing. Like I don't have like an uncle who did leather growing up. It's like, man, I know nothing. So leather store Dallas, turns out there's a bunch of them. So I drive after work that day to a leather store. I take my buddy's journal with me. I'm like, hey, I want to make this. And they're like, all right, we can help you with that. And so they start walking me around the store. And I'm like doing the quick math, like, man, how much money am I about to spend? Again, I'm working for the local church full time and my wife stays home with a kid. So it's like we had enough to pay our bills and provide for my family, but not a lot left over. And I'm doing the quick math. And then we get to the very end and like, all right, you can either buy a panel of leather. So think like 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper size. It's kind of pre-cut, or you can buy a full side of leather, like half a cow, half a bison in this case. And I was like, well, how much was the half a bison? And it was like $180. So that plus all the tools was like $299 and change. I remember specifically it was less than $300, which was a lot of money. I mean, it's still a lot of money, but it was a ton of money for us back at the time. And I was just like, what the heck? Let's go for it. And so I buy the side of bison leather, I get all the tools, and I'm driving home. I had not told my wife I was doing this, which is a pro marriage tip for everyone listening. Not so much, but no, we have a great marriage. But I get home, I park, and I'm walking in front of the front window. We didn't have a garage. And we had some really good friends over at the time. And one of them infamously said, like, is that a cow? To which my wife was like, oh gosh, what's Joe doing now? Right. So I walk in the front door carrying this rolled up side of leather. She's like, what are you doing? What is that? I was like, it's actually a side of bison leather. And so, man, that was in May of 2018 when Daly Goods was now born. I still carry the very first journal I made with me today. It's a little pocket-sized one that's kind of the size of my iPhone. But yeah, I started, the first few weeks and months just crafting and tinkering myself, making some stuff for my friends, family, coworkers, a couple neighbors. And eventually one coworker at the church was like, hey, I want to buy a couple for my son or my brother. And so sold him a few. And really those first few years, it truly was like a hobby. I think we made after expenses a couple grand those first few years. I was like, oh man, working for the church where I make money on my hobby, I don't lose money. Like this is awesome. And then, man, to tie it to generosity, even specifically, and the company, just to keep the story going, it really had a pivot point in 2020. And so we felt called to move to Waco. It's a fun, different story for another day, but through a series of events that were very, very clearly from the Lord, praying, processing openly with others, it was like, go, 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 go. We weren't running from anything. We loved the life and the ministry. We were living in Dallas, but he called us to Waco. So moved to Waco, and the church we moved to was in a lot of debt. And debt's a big part of our story. We had paid off $80,000 of debt the first 2 years of our marriage. The church we came from in Dallas had never had debt. And so we moved to Waco, and the church there had some debt. And in December, the pastor started talking about it. And we knew about it. I moved there to work there at the time. So I knew about it. I was in operations. I was very aware of all the church finances. But during this sermon, we just like, man, I think we're supposed to participate in this in a level that would be different in kind than we had ever done before. And so we were planning to renovate our home. That was the reason we bought the home we did in Waco, was to renovate it. And we had saved some money from the sale of our home in Dallas and just some other savings. And so we're getting ready to renovate it. All the while, there's this sermon on paying off the church's debt. And my wife and I feel led to give more than we'd ever given in a year before in a one-time gift. It was just a categorically different amount of money and a gift that was new to us. And we were already bought in on trying to be biblically generous, not just checking some 10% box. And so we were doing our best to practice generosity. But yeah, we felt the Lord calling us to give, and we did. And man, it was one of the most fun, crazy, joyful, awesome experiences we've ever had, right? Just getting to click give on a gift that was just way bigger than we'd ever given before. And at the time, we talked openly about the number and the amount with our church small group, with a couple of really close friends, just celebrating, saying, hey, not look at us, but look what God allowed us to be a part of, and celebrate this with us. And they were challenged by that, encouraged by that, inspired by that. And just, we had a lot of fun, just really joyfully saying no to half of the renovation. It's like, all right, like our home's plenty good. We'll be fine. We live in America. Like, it's okay. God's good, and this is worth it. And so, man, we did that in December of 2020. And in January, 30 days later, man, he resupplied everything in a way that still is just like, does not make mathematical sense and is just mind blowing. And so it was a tax refund, a home improvement program from a city we lived in multiple years prior. And then the biggest portion of it was just an order for Daly Goods that was massive, massive, massive compared to anything I had done before yet as a hobby. And really, as the story goes on, in 2021, the company darn near 10x'd what we did in 2020. All still a hobby. But the combination of that plus the generosity has just continued to kind of feed each other in the years since. I realize that's a long answer to your question, but kind of the way it started and the way it has grown from a hobby into what it is today, really, I see the Lord's hand in combining both of those with just the willingness to do it, but then also just the generosity component and just doing our imperfect best to follow what we felt like He called us to do.
From prior conversations that you and I have had, I know that generosity is kind of in the DNA of the company. It's in how you think about profits and revenue, and even your growth strategy for the business is inherently generous. Can you just share a little bit about the progression of kind of moving from going full time to where this is your primary source of income to leveraging every part of the business to live more generously, even in non-financial sense?
So when we went to work for the local church, it was so crystal clear, like, man, this is what we're supposed to go do. And it felt like a calling. And so once the company got to the point where I basically had two full-time jobs, and it was like, oh man, I don't want two full-time jobs, right? I'm married, I got young kids, I got my own time with and relationship with the Lord I'm trying to do, and it just got to be too much. And so thankfully it didn't like take me out. There was no, I think it's sad to even have to clarify that these days when you leave working for the local church, but it's like, man, no moral failure, nothing happened, no story behind the story. It got too big. And so we prayed and processed and sought counsel with our small group, our friends, our family, my pastor, who was my boss pastor and friend, kind of three in one. And man, everyone was unanimous. It's like, we think you should go try to scale this leather company to the glory of God. And with that, it was a couple of things. One, they were like, dude, people's hobbies don't grow and surpass their full-time job. That's like not normal. And really, I attribute a lot of the growth of the company to, again, my wife and I's imperfect attempts to just be generous with it, and not in some formulaic way, definitely not in a prosperity gospel way, the way the prosperity gospel is traditionally defined. I do not believe that for a second, but really just trying to say, all right, Lord, this is all yours. And so I start with that to tie it to the generosity piece, because with that, man, I believe greed and materialism are two of the greatest evils in the world today, especially America. Like, I'm not saying that to fire for effect. Like, I really do believe that those are two of the greatest evils out there. And so with the company, leaving the church vocationally speaking was like, oh man, am I selling out? Am I doing this to chase money? Am I doing this for the right reasons? And I was very afraid of that. And I'm still, perfect love casts out fear. And I realize in Jesus, we have nothing to be afraid of. But it's like, man, when I'm not walking in step with the Spirit, my fear is that I would love the world, I'd love the things of the world, and that I would start doing this for the wrong reasons. And so I'm really trying to be mindful of that, just knowing the many, many warnings in Scripture against worldliness, love of world, greed, materialism, and then just knowing my own heart. And so with that, we're really trying to architect the company and architect our lives in a way to protect against that, and then also to take the offensive. And so, man, we've been deeply inspired and formed by the likes of Alan Barnhart with Barnhart Crane, Stanley Tam, God Owns My Business. And so we're praying through what it would look like to like legally give the company away. It's similar to Barnhart and Tam. Pete Oakes is another guy I look up to and have had a chance to spend some time with recently. And he's got another way that he's done that and doing that. And so, man, we would say theologically, God owns everything. And it's just like, oh man, there's businesses who've like literally done that and legally done that. And one, I just think that's cool. But two, in line with our convictions of not wanting money to take us out, the love of money, I should say, to take us out, and really feeling the conviction to cap our lifestyle so that we can be more generous, so that we can use the company as a mechanism to fund all sorts of cool things. Yeah, just the influence of guys like Alan and Pete and Stanley, books I've read around the topic. And then again, mostly just the scriptures. I'm like, man, God's word has so much to say around money. And a friend and pastor might said once, I think if we just read our Bibles on a deserted island and nothing else, not the American culture, not society, but just a deserted island in our Bible, I think we'd walk away thinking wealth or winning the lottery is more like cancer than it is a blessing. And man, that's always stuck with me. And so he's speaking, 30,000 foot there. He's not adding nuance. He's not adding how money in and of itself is an evil. He's saying that as like a point. But man, there are just so many warnings against it that my wife and I are doing our best to be mindful of. And then again, just having a ton of fun getting to use the profit and use the excess as the Lord's grown the company to be strategically and intentionally generous with it.
Yeah, there's a bunch of great things that you just said in there that I want to come back to. But before that, I want to just circle back to that decision to go full time. Just thinking through if I was going through that kind of a decision, going from ministry life into, full time in the business world, the different kind of categories of questions or uncertainties that might be going through my mind. What happens if the business isn't successful and trying to provide for a young family? Am I supposed to be leaving the ministry world to go into the business world? You kind of touched on that a little bit, but what would you say is like the top things that you had to kind of wrestle with or surrender in that decision process, and especially in kind of walking through that with your wife together as I'm sure a very joint decision?
Totally. That's a great question. And it was harder than I like to admit because of some of the things it revealed in my heart. So it did start with just getting to this place like, man, this is not sustainable. And so, that was just trying to be honest. And whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, just take an audit of our life. It's like, man, are we living the life that God would call us to live? And so it started by just saying, all right, like, I'm not okay. I have no margin in my life. I was waking up to try to work, to have a quiet time, work on Daly Goods a little bit so that I could then go be faithful, at my 40, 50 hour a week job at the church, come back home, try to plug back into Daly Goods a little bit to see what I missed throughout the day, then try to be a present husband and father, then go to bed and do it all over again. And it just was not a sustainable rhythm. And so as we prayed about it and processed it, a couple things come to mind is one, we live a very open, authentic, transparent life to where our church small group, man, they know how much money we make, what we give, what we spend. They know we do Find My Friends where we have each other's location. When we meet together for group, it's like, man, here's where I'm struggling. It's a pretty open, authentic way of life that, candidly, we know no other way to live. And so with processing that decision, because of how we live our lives, like those people were very well informed to speak into our life and just, man, we trust them. They love us. They love Jesus. They have the Spirit of God inside of them. They know their Bible. And so, processing a decision like that when you live your life very open and transparently, I'm not saying it makes it, painless or easy, but I would say it's a better way to live. And I say that not like, oh, look at me, look at us, we do that. Like we get all that from the scriptures and just trying to live open, authentic lives where we confess openly, we encourage openly, we share openly. And so with that, as that decision came, having people who know us and love us really helped, would be a way to say that. And so that made our decision to do it. It's like, all right, we got these people standing beside us saying, we think this is God's best for your life. We think this is what wisdom and love would have you do. And so doing it with others was big. And then, yeah, I look back though, I definitely got way too much identity for working for the local church. Like I never would have said that to someone else. I never would have counseled that. I wouldn't have taught that from a stage. Like I wouldn't have said I believed there's like a JV or a varsity within Christianity based on where you work. Like I don't believe that. And yet I think it had crept into my own heart that I believed it for myself. And so that was just, I had to wrestle through that. And it was ugly to admit that I started to believe, oh, God will love me more because I work for the church. And it's just like, man, I don't think we see that in scripture anywhere. I don't think that's ever been really accepted or understood in church history. And really, when I read my Bible, 1 Peter 2 is probably one of the best places where it says, man, we are a kingdom of priests, a holy nation, right? All Christians are called to live a life on mission, no matter where you get your paycheck from. Like God doesn't care where you get your paycheck from. He cares where your heart's at. And so that was definitely one of, if not the biggest things I had to wrestle through. And so I was afraid that I was like leaving a superior calling to chase an inferior calling, which again is like, it's just ugly to admit that. Because again, I never would have looked at the other guys in my church small group and said, hey, I'm better than you because I work for the church, because I don't believe that. And yet I did believe that in some ways if I was turning the mirror and facing it on myself. So processing and wrestling through that was difficult, but also really freeing, as well as, like I said, just doing it with other people. And so yeah, everyone, I want to say it was probably 8, 10, 4, probably 16 to 18 people in total were kind of our inner circle in that season. And every single one of them, all 18, like, hey, this is what we think you should go do. So it's like, all right, like that seems like clarity from the Lord that this is the path he has for us for this next season.
So you mentioned that you and your wife decided to set a lifestyle cap at some point or a finish line. Can you walk us through where did you get that idea and how did you actually go about setting your finish line?
Good. Yeah. I think the first time I was exposed to it was through Stanley Tam and his great book, God Owns My Business. It might have been a podcast or a blog from Alan Barnhart. I think it was one of those two guys initially. But man, I have, I alluded to it earlier of just my conviction that greed and materialism are two of the greatest evils in the church. And just, man, as I read my Bible and just look at life, I'm like, America is the richest, freest, most prosperous country in the history of humanity. And my Bible says, to whom much is given, much is going to be expected. And so, to be clear, there's a lot of really, really good, generous things happening in and through our country and the people in our country. And I love and I'm super humbled and grateful to live in this country. So, that's not a shot on America. It's just a attempt to define reality. And so, I think we've just always, we grew up in, I'd say, modest, small town, Midwestern homes. My wife from Central Illinois, me from Southern Minnesota. And, working for the local church for a decade, we were very content and humbled and grateful for the life we had there, just living off a church salary. And so with that, the conviction of saying, man, our friends still go to the church, work at the church. Some of the people, one of the other couples we're in life group with, they do full-time vocational ministry. And so it's just like, why should our life change? We have everything we need. Like we're grateful and content for the ways that the Lord has already provided for us. And so if we're going to go try to scale and grow this business, like we don't want that to change us. So Alan Barnhart said something that stuck with me along these lines. He said, I've read my Bible for the purpose of all things money. And to simplify my findings, I have two main takeaways. One, God owns it all, and the ability to make money is from him. And he said, two, business success is more dangerous to my soul than business failure. And man, that really resonates with me and with my wife, to where it's like, man, if we're going to grow this thing, try to grow this thing, how do we put those parameters and guardrails in place so it doesn't take us out? And so yeah, we're trying to make our life, no different than what it was when I worked for the church full time, and just say, we love Chick-fil-A and Chipotle now or back then, and we still love Chick-fil-A and Chipotle today. And we're grateful for the money to even buy that, right? That's still eating out. And so, yeah, doing our best to live a simple life, be grateful for what we have. And yeah, with, lifestyle cap, not income cap, it's like, man, inflation's real. And so if eggs keep going up in 10 years, I still want to buy eggs for breakfast. And so it's like, we'll adjust accordingly. But really just the power of the word enough. It's such a powerful word. Like it's so, so, so powerful to say, man, I have enough. We have enough. God has provided. God will keep providing, but he has provided. And how do we take that and turn outward, turn others focused? It's been just a fun, life-giving, freeing way to live. And man, hear me say, we don't do it perfect, right? We're trying to constantly evaluate, probably, I don't know, quarterly, give or take. It's like, man, are we doing okay? Like, are we doing what we said we were going to do? Is this the lifestyle we still think we're called to live? And so, but yeah, if anything, we would be afraid of it going up. Yeah, it goes back to other people know, we got friends in our life who know what we make, know what we give, know what we spend. And so we have other people that we've invited in to hold us accountable to the things we've said we want to be about.
Yeah, it's interesting that taking such a intentional approach, and I think that's one of the real powers of having a finish line, is that it just kind of protects you in a very profound way from a lot of the things you're describing as, potential traps in the future, with that slow, subtle ones, not like, rapid ones that are really obvious when they happen, slow, gradual change over time. And I'd love to know, as the business has continued to grow, how did having made that kind of intentional decision early on in the process affect the kind of business decisions you made going forward from there? Because I think there's actually a huge value in making that kind of a commitment or decision early on, before you really know what's going to happen. And then when things scale or grow, as, businesses often do, you don't have to constantly be making new decisions you've already kind of figured out. So I'd love to hear how that affected things on the business side from this personal conviction.
So I alluded to this earlier. We have not yet, I'll say, legally given the company away, but that is something we're prayerfully processing right now. We're open to, whether it's giving it to a nonprofit such as NCF or putting it in like a stewardship trust or different ways, just to really and literally and legally say, hey, this company is not ours. It belongs to God. and allowing our employees to know that, our government to know that, and just, doing it that way. We haven't done that yet, but we're exploring that. But whether we do that or not, one of the things as we try to live openly, authentically in our own lives, we do that within the company too. And so our employees, they very much know, hey, this is how we think about money. This is how we think about the company. This is how we think about the growth of the company. And so that's done a couple things. One, it forces us to make sure we're paying a fair wage to our employees. Because if you talk about giving a bunch of money away and you're not paying people well, they're going to be like, well, why don't you pay me more? Right. And so I want to have a death grip on that and just make sure, man, we're paying a fair, above average, generous wage to our employees, and that they feel like it's a blessing to work for us based on what they get paid for the work that they do. I think that's a way to be generous. And then with that, by talking openly about how we think about the company, how we think about the profits, it's really attracted a certain type of employee. It's people who say, man, I want to go work for a company like that. I want to be a part of a company that's going to think about it that way. So it's so far, we're small and we're just getting going. We've got 5 employees that they're like, man, we love being a part of a company that is about those types of things. And so far, those 2 things are going well. But yeah, if we don't pay a good wage and we talk openly about giving a bunch of money away, that could quickly shoot ourselves in the foot if we're not careful. So there's even a little bit of baked in accountability there in terms of how we treat our employees, which is something that's very, very important to us. We want, one of the things we say is, man, we want to have a loving and encouraging company culture. As Christians, we're fooling ourselves if we're growing and profitable and giving money away, but our employees wouldn't say that they feel like they're loved and encouraged. It's like, oh man, that's like, I think if I had 3 words to describe God, it'd be holy, loving, and generous. And so it's like, man, if we're not loving, if that isn't part of our DNA, we're doing something wrong. And so, yeah, talking openly about it at the company and structuring it that way with our employees has definitely been something that so far has helped us, but something we want to keep tabs on, Lord willing, as we grow.
I know the principle of first fruits from scripture has really had an impact on you, and you've been kind of thinking through how this would show up in your business and how you actually give from the business. Could you share some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely, man. It was, and even, a great convo you and I had, Cody, a while back, is some of the things the Lord used to get me wrestling with that more. And so, as I understand it, I'll say I'm not a history buff. The older I get, I like history more and more, but studying up on old things. But just in research and reading on first fruits, it really wasn't necessarily like a percentage or a portion as much as it was just the literal first part, a portion of. And so, but as I understand Old Testament, even really today, take Old Testament out, just agricultural practice, right? The first fruits would have been the stuff that grew up first and the biggest. No, it was the seed crop for next year. They took the biggest and the strongest and set it aside to grow crops the next year. And so if you were to take the first fruits and give it to God as an offering, as a sacrifice, you're quite literally committing agricultural suicide. You wouldn't do that. It was bad farming. It was like, no, that's the stuff you save to then use next year. And so for the Israelites to give their first fruits was like all the more, like the surrounding nations were just like, dude, that's not how you farm, right? But yet we know when they did it faithfully, God continued to not just provide, but increase their crop, increase their harvest. And so I'm like, man, what does it look like to do that today as not an Old Testament Jew who has to, right? We're not under the law, we're under grace. But man, as a wisdom principle, as a love principle, man, what does that look like for me today? And so for this year, 2026, we're praying through, or we've prayed through and landed on, man, we're going to make our giving this year based on gross revenue, not net profit. I don't know if we'll do that every year, but just say, man, every dollar we earn is from God, not just the net dollars. And so with that, just in a modern context, as I'm trying to grow a business, like it takes cash to grow a business. It takes cash to buy inventory, to get leather, to fulfill orders. And it's just, we're trying to say, all right, how can we make decisions that keep us dependent on the Lord? And so by calculating our minimum giving this year, what we're going to commit to no matter what off of gross revenue, and doing that on a frequent basis, it's putting ourselves in a posture to depend on the Lord to continue to provide and to continue to grow the company. And so, yeah, that's been something I've been wrestling with. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would love the freedom of conviction to have more in savings and more in reserves. And we have some, and we're a young company where we're trying to build those things. But it's like, man, at the end of the day, the Bible is all about being dependent on the Lord. God, give us this day our daily bread. Proverbs 30, give me neither poverty nor riches. And just this idea that, man, our modern way of life is, I could make a case that a lot of us Western American Christians in 2026, we literally architect our lives to not need God. everything from a pantry to a fridge to a closet to a garage to a bank account and to insurance. And I'm not knocking any of those things in and of themselves. I have and use all of them. But it's just like, oh man, I don't need to think about God providing for me daily and being depending on him sometimes, and just really trying to live my life and run my company in a way that forces us to be more dependent on him. And man, that's scary. I don't like it. And I think that's sometimes exactly what he wants for us. So just trying to live in that tension. And yeah, that's what that's looking like this year is we're going to calculate our baseline giving off of gross revenue, not net profit.
Yeah, that is a very interesting point. And I think you're hitting on some really heart level things there. So, just in the kind of general generosity conversation, you'll hear every once in a while that you should be giving until it hurts. Like you should be feeling some consequences from your giving. And, I think that there's some behind that. But I think what you're describing exactly is a much more accurate description of, I think, really how God has designed generosity, which is all about dependence and surrender. And so it's not so much that you need to be suffering all the time, but it's that we are designed to be dependent. And it is very feasible in this time and place to architect out dependence from your life. And so it's one thing to give of your surplus, like make sure all your needs are met, all your family's needs are met, and then give generously from all the extra beyond that. And it's another thing, what you're describing, to kind of make your giving decision first and be like, I'm going to do this and let's see what God does. And I'm hoping that he comes through. And that, I think, is where some of the most powerful stories come from that really solidify faith. Like this is not just something that I should do. This is something that I want to do because I get to see God in a way that I would not be able to see otherwise. And you actually earlier kind of experienced this in a powerful way when you were talking about the renovation. And, maybe you didn't have all the links all the way played out in your head, but you made that decision to give in a way that was going to like really change your plans. And then God provided for what you needed anyway after that through all kinds of crazy ways. And now you have that story to share, but that's because the giving came up front. And so that's something that I continually wrestle with. I'm like, in what ways can we reorchestrate our own giving? And my wife and I, to be able to see God work in that way. Because, we just hear stories like this over and over, and God comes through in such powerful ways. And then I'm like, how much giving are we kind of missing out on that because we knew we would be fine? Like we knew it was easy to send out because it was not going to really change. It was just like some convenience or something like that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of that whole order of things and how that plays out in your life.
No, Keelan, that's great. A friend of mine's got a quote that I love and hate. I love it because I think it's true and biblical, and I hate it because it exposes the parts of my heart that aren't fully like Jesus yet. But she said, if dependence is the goal, weakness is an advantage. I'm like, if dependence is the goal, weakness is an advantage. I'm like, oh man, that sounds so good. And I don't like living my life like that's true, even though I think it is true as a Christian. And then the other thought tied very closely to that, I get the privilege to teach some of the finance stewardship classes at my church, and just taught a class last night. We do a 5-week study, and this one was on generosity. And man, one of the points we make is the giving that gets really highlighted, or, to use a modern word, kind of platformed in our New Testament, almost all of it is sacrificial. We would use the word like extreme or radical or sacrificial. You got the poor widow who gave everything. You got Zacchaeus who comes to know Jesus and then pays people back fourfold, gives away half of his possessions. You got the Macedonians in 2 Corinthians 8, which it's like out of their extreme poverty, they begged earnestly to give to the saints. It's like, wait, what? Extreme poverty and begged earnestly? Like that doesn't go together. And then, yeah, just even in the book of Acts, Acts 2, Acts 4, you've got the believers selling and laying all their possessions at the apostles' feet. So it's not socialism, right? It's not forced on them, but they're willingly saying, no, 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 it's not mine, it's God's, and just making sure everyone had enough for themselves. No one lacked anything. And so those four aren't exhaustive, but you have these examples where it's like, oh man, that doesn't really describe most of my life or my friends' lives. And so again, different people are going to be called to different things, different amounts. One body, many members, right? We're all going to give an account for our lives to the Lord, and they're going to look different sometimes. They're not going to all look the same. But just the examples he did give us in Scripture, I would argue, are oftentimes stronger and more than what I experience or what I see my friends or just the modern American church experiencing today. And so I'm like, man, I gotta wrestle with that. I gotta do business with that. I can't claim ignorance after reading his word and saying, well, I didn't know. It's like, no, he gave some pretty clear examples and illustrations that he chose to preserve for a couple thousand years for us here today that we got to wrestle with what that looks like for our own lives. And I love how Randy Alcorn says it. It's like, man, you can't take it with it, but you can send it on ahead, right? And so just learning and believing, man, heaven is our home. This world is not our home, and life is a mist. Life is a vapor. We're gonna be dead and gone way, 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 way sooner than we realize it, especially in light of eternity. And so just, man, what's my time horizon, right? What's my saving, investing, and giving time horizon? And if it's 5 years, that'll be one thing. If it's 10, 20, 30, 40 years, but it's like, man, if it's infinity years, like it should be, if I'm walking by the Spirit, that changes how I think about it and the decisions I make. And man, hear me say loud and clear, I'm way too prone to make 5-minute time horizon decisions than I'd like to admit. But yeah, I'm trying my best to say, all right, heaven's my home. I'm going to die sooner than I think I am. And so how does that inform what I do with my money here and now?
It's really interesting to just think through the types of stories where, like, you decided to make a gift and then God came through and provided an amount that allowed you to do what you had intended in the first place. And we do get to hear stories like that. And the interesting thing is, every time we hear a story like that, the giver is always surprised when God provides. It was never something that they expected or felt like they deserved. And I think that's the danger in teaching, that we give in order to receive, especially in like kind. Like, we give money and then we expect to receive money, because God doesn't always provide a blessing to us in the form of whatever we gave. And if we have an expectation that is not met by God, it can actually affect our faith. So it's a wrong expectation that is set, because I've experienced and heard stories of people who gave and then God provided for them by taking something out of their life, like a desire. He might actually provide for you in a way that you never would have expected, or maybe didn't even realize at the moment. But looking back, it becomes more clear. There's definitely things that I wanted, and really after setting a finish line in my own life, the vision I had for my future changed dramatically, even overnight, but over the course of years. I'm not aiming at any of the things that I used to aim at. And that was God providing for me, showing me how to live with contentment, showing me how to actually believe that I have enough, not just to say it or think it, but to live as if I've always had enough. And I just think about Paul saying, when I had much and when I had little, I had contentment. I always had enough. And I just wonder, in the seasons where I don't feel like I have enough, I'm probably just wrong. I'm probably just wrong about what I actually need.
That's really good.
Because I do have enough. I've always had enough. The fact that I woke up this morning means I've always had enough. So I can't honestly stand here and say there were seasons where I didn't have enough. But Joe, I'd love to hear what
I'm going to steal that, Cody. I'm probably just wrong. That's a great line. I'm like, man, I think I'll speak for myself. I need to say that more often than I do. So sorry, I interrupted you. You're going to ask a question.
I've heard you say that generosity can be more than money, but it's never less. Can you just share a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah. It's man, that's not original to me. I stole that from someone. I forget who I heard it from first, but I do. Can we give our time? Absolutely. Can we give possessions? Absolutely. Can we give all sorts of things to be generous? Man, absolutely. So it's more than money. And I would say, biblically, it's not less than money. Even just 1 Corinthians 16, on the first of every week, you should set aside some money in proportion to your income, so that there will not be a collecting when I come. Like, Paul is commanding the church to give financially. So Well, again, I don't believe we're under the law anymore. The Old Testament tithe, which I didn't know this until not that long ago, but the Old Testament tithe, there's 3 tithes, right? There's two 10% tithes a year, a third 10% tithe every 3 years. So that's 23 1/3% on average per year. And then on top of that, they would leave corners of their fields unharvested. They'd have free will offerings, and they just were humans. Like they're probably kind and generous to each other as is. And so, if we were under the tithe, I would argue it's more than 10%. It's 23 1/3 at minimum, but we're not. We're under grace. We're not under the law anymore. But there is, I would say, a clear command in my understanding of the scriptures in 1 Corinthians 16, like giving financially is part of the Christian life. And so, it starts today. It starts wherever you're at, but there is a component. You can't just say, oh, I don't have much, I'll give my time, or oh, I don't have much, I'll be generous in other ways. It's like, I don't see that in my Bible. And it's honestly, I would argue it's easier to give when you have less anyway. And that's how you learn, and that's how you start, and that's how you grow the muscle and the gift of generosity. And so, if I handed you guys a $10 bill and I was like, hey, here's $10, give $1 away. It's like easy, right? But it's like, hey, here's $10 million, give $1 million away. Now you could be like, well, yeah, that's still 9 million, but it's like, dude, giving away $1 million, that's a lot of money, right? And that's just using a 10% mathematical as an example. Again, I don't believe it's inherently 10% is the magic number, but yeah, just learning and practicing giving regardless of how much you have. Whoever is faithful in little will be faithful in much. And so, yeah, I see in 1 Corinthians 16 just a clear command to give systematically, regularly. So, yeah, is it more than money? Man, absolutely. And even, man, as I get older, sometimes it's harder to give my time than it is to give my money, right? Time you can't get back. Money, you in theory can go make more of. So I'm not knocking giving time. Time is arguably as valuable or even more valuable sometimes to give. But yeah, as Christians, I think generosity always has to include some sort of financial component.
Yeah, that's good. I like that concise way of saying it because you capture so much depth in a short phrase. Well, Joe, you clearly have a lot going on and a lot going on in the future, growing business, growing family, all kinds of good stuff. As you think about the next 5 or 10 years, what are you most excited about coming on the horizon?
First and foremost, I hope I'm a good husband and good dad. I've been married 12 and a half years. My boys are 6 and 9. That's the time we're recording this. And so, man, 5 to 10 years, I'm going to lose one of them and the other one's going to be hot on his heels. And so I hope that's true. But on the business front, man, we are 16 months into doing this full time since leaving the church staff. And our hope and prayer is just that this thing would get really big, again, so that we can give a ton of money away and provide a lot of meaningful jobs. Right now, Daly Goods, we only hire moms. So all of the production is done by our amazing team of moms. They are a mom first and an employee second. And so what happens is every Sunday, they send us their hours for the week. And so we truly do work around their schedule where they can prioritize their family, their husband, their kids first, and then work around that. And so that's been awesome. They're amazing. I trust moms more than I trust any other demographic in the world. And they've been awesome. And so I'm like, oh man, the bigger we get, the more moms we can hire. The bigger we get, the more money we can give away and just do good and talk openly, right? I also think the scriptures leave so much more room for us to have conversations like this and talk more openly about money than people think it does. There's the verse in Matthew 6 that I kind of think it's taken out of context. Beware of practicing your righteousness before others when giving to the needy. Yeah, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. It's like, man, in the same sermon, he says, let your light shine before others. And so I'm by no means trying to live a life where it's like, hey, look at what I'm doing. But it's just like, oh no, look at what God's doing. Here's how he has us doing that. If that encourages and inspires you, awesome. Again, I said those names earlier, Alan Barnhart, Pete Oak, Stanley Tam. If it wasn't for guys like that and many others sharing openly, I wouldn't have the vision to do things similarly as they've done. And so yeah, we really are praying and believing and hoping to scale this thing, as big as the Lord sees us fit to steward. And yeah, because of the finish lines we've put in place, we're not motivated by an exit. I'm not saying Christians who want an exit are wrong or bad. I don't think that's going to be a part of my wife and I's story. And so, man, we hope to do this for a few decades if he lets us, and then, give the company to whoever we think is going to steward it best when we think our time is done. Just viewing the company as the thing that can provide meaningful products, meaningful gifts for people, meaningful jobs, and then meaningful generosity with the profit. And so we'll see. But yeah, I don't have any specific number goals. Terry Looper in the book Sacred Pace was super informative and formative for me recently, just kind of work limits in terms of hours and no sales goals. again, I'm not saying Christians who have sales goals are wrong, but just for me and for the way I want to run Daily Goods, that really resonates. So just tracking other things, my input, my work, working hard, being diligent, but really trusting God with the results. I'm like, man, God might want us to grow more. God might want us to grow less, but I'm going to try to leave that part up to him and just focus on what only I can focus on. So yeah, I hope we grow, and we'll see. Time will tell.
If people want to get connected with Daily Goods and check out some of the offerings you have there, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find us at dalygoods.com. And Daly is just DALY, no I or no E in there, just DALY, dalygoods.com. And then, yeah, our specialty is corporate gifts, like kind of bulk branded, logoed gifts. We're really more of a bulk gift company than we are a leather company. Right now we deal only in leather. But man, again, as I shared a couple stories earlier, I love giving a good gift and love helping people think through giving a good gift. And so about 95% of our business is like logoed custom gifts more than it is, individual orders with initials. We'll do those all day long. But yeah, we love getting company or church or school or conference logos and slapping it on some leather goods. It's a lot of fun.
As we close our time together, I want to leave some space for our manager's minute. And this is how we wrap up every episode, with a practical action for our listeners on how they can step into their role as stewards and manage God's wealth wisely. Joe, do you have a suggestion for our listeners today?
Yeah, man, something that came to mind is as cash is slowly dying in our world, we're moving more and more to credit cards, debit cards, all things digital. Years ago, I would carry cash as a backup, kind of as a just in case, and I still do to a degree. But increasingly lately, I'm like, oh man, what if this cash that I carry is just a way to be intentionally generous? And so I'll purposefully try to carry, for me, that number is 50 or $100, that's a lot of money for us. That's not like a dollar bill or even a $5 bill, which $5 might be a lot for someone. So like wherever you're at, carrying around an amount of cash that's like meaningful, and just for the sole purpose of saying, Lord, what do you want me to do with this? Like, this is for the purpose of giving it away, just to bless someone, to leave a really, really generous tip, or to just give it to someone who you sense is having a hard day, or just as you prayerfully, moment by moment, live your life and ask the Lord to reveal that to you. But that's been a ton of fun. And that's not something we like calculate as part of our giving. That's just a kind of extra, bonus, discretionary, whatever. But carrying a meaningful amount of cash for the sole purpose of giving it away. And then once you give it away, you go get more cash and do it again. And it's just kind of an on repeat. And it varies how often I give it. I don't have like a set, like it has to be every week or every month. But yeah, just carrying cash for the purpose of being generous has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love that suggestion. And just kind of when you have it available, it keeps your senses sharpened for those opportunities. Because, when it's not ready, you're just not always paying attention. And so I think you just get to see a lot more stories when you're prepared for it, intentionally creating margin like that. Joe, this has been an awesome conversation. So fun to hear all the ways that God has worked through you and your family, your business. Thanks for taking the time to share with us today.
Guys, thank you so much for having me. I'm humbled, I'm honored, had a ton of fun, and man, I hope it's helpful.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show, guys. If you want to find any references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 185. And if you'd like to get in touch, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at hello@finishlinepledge.com. Now, as most of you know, on the Finish Line podcast, we are all about stories, seeing how God draws us into generosity over a lifetime. But sometimes these stories can leave us thinking, what's the next step look like for me? That's exactly why we've launched a whole new podcast called Applied Generosity, which explores the full landscape of the generous life across 7 different dimensions of generosity. Applied Generosity helps make sense of the hundreds of stories we've shared on the Finish Line podcast to help you find that best next step. If you've been inspired by these stories and want to take things to the next level, check out Applied Generosity anywhere you listen to podcasts or at appliedgenerosity.com. That's all we have for today. We'll see you next time.